The small house was always filled with a special kind of noise. It wasn't just the sound of the television or the radio. It was the sound of life. A busy, sometimes overwhelming, but loving life. This was the home of a man, his wife, and their 3 young children. The children were triplets, 2 boys and a girl, and they had just started to walk, their steps wobbly and filled with laughter. But their laughter was shadowed by a quiet worry that had settled deep into their parents' hearts. The triplets had been diagnosed with a rare illness that affected their muscles. It didn't stop them from being happy children, but it meant their future was uncertain. They needed constant therapy, special equipment, and many doctor's visits. The medical bills were like a constant heavy rain, always falling, threatening to soak everything. The man, let's call him Eris, felt the weight of this rain every single day. He worked as a project manager at a large engineering firm. It was a good job, a respectable job, but his salary was like a small bucket trying to catch a waterfall. Every month he would look at the numbers, his brow furrowed with stress, wondering how to make it all work. He loved his family more than anything, but the pressure was changing him, making him quiet and tired. His wife, we'll call her Lena, was the heart of the home. Before the children were born, she had been a brilliant engineer herself, with dreams of designing buildings and bridges that would change the city skyline. But when the triplets were born with their health challenges, she made a choice. She put her career on hold to care for them. Her world shrank to the size of their home, filled with medicine schedules, physical therapy exercises, and the endless love she poured into her children. In the rare quiet moments, when the children were finally asleep, Lena would open her old laptop. The screen's glow would light up her tired but determined face. On that screen were her dreams, detailed plans and designs for a new kind of city infrastructure. She imagined buildings that created their own energy, and water systems that cleaned and reused every drop. It was a beautiful, brilliant idea. She called it her quiet project, a secret garden for her mind where she could escape the worries of the day. Eris knew about her project. Sometimes she would show him a new drawing, her eyes shining with excitement. "Look, my love," she would say. "Imagine if we could build this. It could help so many people." Eris would smile and nod, but inside he felt a pang of sadness. To him, this was just a dream, a fantasy. In the hard, real world of bills and doctor's appointments, beautiful designs on a computer screen couldn't pay for the children's next round of therapy. He saw it as her hobby, a way to cope, but he didn't see it as something real. His reality was his job, the one that provided the roof over their heads, and his job was complicated. His boss was a woman named Victoria. She was sharp, successful, and always in control. Where Aris felt messy and overwhelmed at home, the office under Victoria was a world of order and ambition. She had taken a liking to Aris, seeing a hard worker buried under his troubles. She would call him into her large, glass-walled office. "Aris, you look tired," she would say, not unkindly. "Is everything all right at home?" He would hesitate, then share a little, just a little, about the children's health and the constant financial strain. Victoria would listen intently, then offer him a larger project or a small bonus. She made him feel seen, like his struggles were not a failure but a battle he was bravely fighting. He started to depend on these conversations. They became a lifeline, a place where he felt competent and valued, feelings that were becoming rare in his own home. At home, the strain was beginning to show. One evening, Aris came home late after a difficult day. He was tired and frustrated. The children, who were having a particularly bad day with their muscles, were crying and needed extra attention. Lena was trying to calm them, her own exhaustion clear on her face. The house was a mess of toys and medical supplies. Aris walked in and sighed, dropping his bag heavily by the door. "Is it always going to be like this?" he muttered, more to himself than to Lena. Lena heard him. She stopped rocking their daughter and looked at him, her eyes hurt. "Like what, Aris? Like a home with 3 sick children?" "Yes, for now it is. I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's just, I worked all day and I come home to more chaos. I can't ever just breathe. And you think I can?" Lena's voice was quiet but firm. "I haven't breathed a full breath in 3 years, Aris. My day doesn't end at 5 o'clock. This is my whole life." The argument was short, but it left a chill in the air. It was the first time they had spoken to each other with such sharp edges. Later that night, after they had made up with quiet apologies, Lena sat at her laptop. She was looking at an advertisement for a national engineering competition called The City of Tomorrow. The grand prize was not just a trophy or a small cash reward. It was a fully funded contract, a real chance to build her design. She almost closed the window. It seemed too big, too impossible. But then she thought of Eris's tired face, the mountain of bills on the kitchen counter, and the future her children deserved. With a deep breath and using the last of the money she had saved from her old job, she submitted her designs. She didn't tell Eris. She couldn't bear to see that look on his face again, the look that said her dreams were not important. Weeks passed, and life returned to its stressful normal. The competition was forgotten. Then one ordinary Tuesday, the phone rang. Lena answered, her voice distracted as she tried to stop one of the boys from putting a toy in his mouth. The voice on the other end was formal and excited. They were calling from the competition committee. They told her that her design had not only won, but had stunned the judges. It was revolutionary, they said, and the prize. The prize was a contract, a $750 million contract with the government to make her vision a reality. Lena dropped the phone. She didn't scream or shout. She simply slid down the wall onto the floor, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face silently. The triplets, seeing their mother cry, crawled over to her, their little faces worried. When Eris came home that evening, the house was quieter than usual. Lena was sitting at the kitchen table, a single piece of paper in front of her. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling a smile he hadn't seen in years, a smile of pure, unburdened joy. "Eris," she said, her voice trembling. "Sit down." Worried, he sat. She pushed the paper towards him. He read it once. Then he read it again, his mind unable to process the number, $750 million. It was more money than he could ever imagine. It was a number that could erase every worry, every fear, every sleepless night. He looked from the paper to his wife's face, and a huge, overwhelming wave of relief washed over him. He jumped up, pulled her from her chair, and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "You did it!" he kept shouting. "You did it, Lena. We're saved. The children are saved." For that one evening, the house was filled with a pure golden light. They were a team again, partners who had conquered their giant. They dreamed out loud. A new house adapted for the children's needs, the best doctors in the world, a future without fear. They put the children to bed that night with hearts so full they felt they might burst. Everything was going to be perfect, but outside their warm, joyful home, the world was waiting. And the world, especially the world of Victoria, his boss, had a way of changing things. The golden light of that evening was bright, but it was also about to cast very long and very dark shadows. The golden light of that incredible night lasted for a few days. It felt like a dream. The man Eris walked with a new spring in his step. The constant nagging voice in his head that whispered about bills and medical debt had fallen silent. For the first time in years, he felt light. He looked at his wife, Lena, with a sense of awe. The woman he had seen as a tired, overwhelmed mother was, in fact, a genius who had just solved all their problems. He felt proud. He felt free. The first changes were small but wonderful. Lena immediately hired a part-time nurse, a kind and capable woman, to help with the triplets' therapy and care. This meant Lena could finally get a full night's sleep. It meant Eris could come home to a wife who was less exhausted, who had the energy to smile and talk about something other than doctor's appointments. They started planning a new accessible home with wide hallways for wheelchairs and a special therapy room. They spoke to specialists they could never have afforded before. Hope, which had been a small, flickering candle, was now a bright, steady sun. But slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the air in the house began to change. The win was a huge event, and huge events create their own weather. Lena's quiet project was now a roaring, real-world business. Her phone, which used to ring for family and friends, now buzzed constantly with calls from lawyers, government officials, and journalists. A team of engineers was hired to work under her. She had meetings, endless meetings, sometimes in fancy offices downtown. She bought a few new blouses for these meetings, simple but professional. She had to be sharp to be the boss, to make decisions worth millions of dollars. Eris supported her, he truly did. But he started to feel a shift. The home which had been his place of rest was now often another office for Lena. He would come home hoping for a quiet dinner and find her on a video call, pointing at blueprints spread across the dining table. The triplets, though happier with a more rested mother, still needed him, but now his wife seemed to need him less. At his job, the reaction was different. The news of the contract had spread through the office like wildfire. At first, people clapped him on the back. "Your wife is a rock star," they would say. "You must be set for life. When are you going to retire and move to an island?" He would laugh it off, but the comment started to itch under his skin. He had always been Aris, the hard-working project manager. Now he was Aris, the guy whose wife won the lottery. His own achievements, the projects he was managing, felt small and insignificant next to his wife's $750 million triumph. The person who noticed this change most clearly was his boss, Victoria. She was a master at reading people, and she saw the unease in Aris's eyes. She called him into her office one afternoon. The view from her window was of the whole city, a kingdom she ruled from the 30th floor. "Aris, close the door," she said, her voice smooth. He did and sat down. She didn't mention his wife's success right away. Instead, she talked about his work. "That report you did on the Johnson account was excellent. Sharp, it's a shame, really." "What's a shame?" Aris asked. "It's a shame that such good work might be overshadowed," she said, leaning forward slightly. "You have real potential here. I've always seen it, but potential needs focus. It needs an environment where it can be the main event, not a sideshow." Aris felt a flush of validation. Someone finally saw him. Not his wife, not his children's problems, but him. Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "You know, in this business, perception is everything. Right now, people see you as lucky. I see you as hungry. There's a lead role opening up on the new skyscraper project downtown. It's a career-making position, but it requires absolute dedication. No distractions." She let the word hang in the air. Distractions. He knew what she meant. She meant the chaos at home. She meant his wife's new, all-consuming career. That evening, he went home in a thoughtful mood. Lena was excited. A major magazine wanted to interview her for a cover story. She was talking animatedly, her hands drawing shapes in the air as she described the photographer and the questions they would ask. "Imagine, Aris," she said, her eyes sparkling. "This could inspire so many other women, other mothers, to not give up on their ideas." Aris just nodded, pushing his food around his plate. "That's great," he said, but his voice was flat. Lena noticed. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy?" "I'm happy," he said a little too quickly. "It's just, everyone at work is talking about the magazine thing. They keep calling me Mr. Lena." Lena was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry, that must be annoying. But they're just joking. They know how hard you work." "But do they?" Aris snapped, the frustration finally bubbling over. "My boss basically said my career is becoming a sideshow to your main event." The room went quiet. The word sideshow felt like a slap. Lena's face fell. "My project, this main event, is going to pay for our children's entire future, Aris. It's going to give them a life we could only dream of. This isn't about me versus you. This is about us, but it doesn't feel like us anymore," he said, his voice rising. "It feels like you and your team and your blueprints. I come home and this house is your office. You're not just my wife anymore, you're a CEO. And I'm just the guy who works for Victoria." It was their first real fight since the win. It was no longer about money or stress. It was about something more fragile, their place in each other's lives. Lena felt he was being selfish and insecure. Aris felt she was leaving him behind. Later, in the silence of their bedroom, the distance between them in the bed felt like a mile. Aris stared at the ceiling, Victoria's words echoing in his head. "Absolute dedication, no distractions." He looked at Lena, already asleep from exhaustion. He felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by resentment. She got to be the hero. She got the glory. And what did he get? A new title at home, The Distraction. He didn't know it then, but the foundation of their life together, which had just been strengthened by financial security, was now cracking under the weight of a new kind of strain, the strain of shifting identities. And in those cracks, the seeds of a terrible decision were beginning to grow. The cold silence that settled after their fight didn't leave. It just moved in, like an unwelcome guest, making itself comfortable in their home. The man, Aris, and his wife Lena started talking in short, practical sentences. Did you pay the nurse? The doctor called about the new appointment. I'll be home late. The warm, shared dreams for the future were replaced by a quiet, tense truce. Eris began spending more and more time at the office. It was easier there. The problems at work had clear solutions. A budget could be balanced. A deadline could be met. It was a world of logic, unlike the messy, emotional world of his home. His boss, Victoria, seemed to understand this without him having to say a word. She started inviting him for coffee after work. Not in her office, but at a quiet, expensive lounge nearby. She would listen as he talked about feeling left out, about how Lena's world was now filled with important people, and he was just an afterthought. You're carrying the weight of your family for years, Victoria would say, swirling the wine in her glass. And now, when you should be reaping the rewards, you're being made to feel small. It's not right, Eris. A man of your talent deserves to be the star of his own life. Her words were like a poison, but they felt like medicine. They fed the growing resentment in his heart. He started to see his home life not as a challenge he and Lena were facing together, but as a burden that was holding him back. The constant needs of his sick children, which he had once faced with determination, now felt like an anchor chained to his ankle, pulling him down while Lena sailed away on her famous project. One evening, he came home to chaos. One of the triplets was having a bad reaction to a new medicine and was crying uncontrollably. The nurse had left for the day, and Lena was on the floor trying to calm the child, while the other two were also upset and clinging to her. The house was a mess, and the sound of crying was piercing. Aris stood in the doorway, his briefcase in his hand, and felt nothing but a cold wave of irritation. He saw the chaos not as a family in crisis, but as proof of everything Victoria had said. This was the distraction. This was what was stopping him from taking that lead role on the skyscraper project. He didn't go to help. He just put his briefcase down and said, I can't deal with this right now. I had a long day. Lena looked up at him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. There were tears in her eyes, but not from sadness, from a pure, sharp anger. You can't deal with this? She said, her voice dangerously quiet. This is your child. This is your life. This doesn't feel like a life, he shot back. It feels like a prison sentence. The word prison hung in the air. It was the final brick in a wall that had been building between them for months. Lena looked at him as if she was seeing a stranger. The man she loved, the father of her children, saw their family as a prison. The next day at work, Victoria called him into her office. She didn't ask about his home. She simply slid a formal offer letter across the desk. It was for the lead role on the skyscraper project. The title was impressive. The salary was a significant raise. There's just one thing, Victoria said, looking him directly in the eye. This project requires 100% of you. Your focus, your energy, your loyalty. The board needs to know you're fully committed. That means your personal life needs to be stable, settled. We can't have distractions affecting a project of this magnitude. She wasn't just talking about the job anymore. She was offering him a way out. A new life, a life of order, success, and importance. A life where he would be the star. That night, he didn't go home for dinner. He stayed late at the office, staring at the city lights. He thought about his children's faces. He felt a pull of love, but it was immediately smothered by the overwhelming memory of the crying, the medical supplies, the endless stress. He thought about Lena, but he could only see the powerful, successful CEO, not the tired, loving woman he had married. Then he thought about Victoria's offer. The clean, quiet office, the respect, the power, the freedom from it all. He had made his decision. He drove home, his heart pounding like a drum. The house was quiet for once. The children were asleep. Lena was on the sofa going over some papers. She looked up, and for a brief second he saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, hope that he had come home to make things right. We need to talk, he said, his voice cold and flat. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the living room like a man delivering a business presentation. He told her he was unhappy. He told her he felt they had grown apart. He used phrases like irreconcilable differences. He sounded like a lawyer, not a husband. Lena listened, her face growing paler with every word. What are you saying, Aris? She whispered. I'm saying I want a divorce, he said. The words were finally out in the open, hanging in the air like a death sentence. Lena felt the room spin. She couldn't breathe. A divorce? Because of the money? Because of my work? We can fix this. We can go to counseling. It's not about the money, he interrupted, though it was a lie. It's about me. I need to focus on my career. I have a huge opportunity, and I can't do it with all of this. He waved his hand, a gesture that took in the whole house. The children's toys in the corner, the medical equipment. Then he delivered the final, cruelest blow. It was the part he had rehearsed in his head, the part he thought made him sound reasonable. And about the children, he said, avoiding her eyes. I think it's best for everyone if you have full custody. Lena stared at him, completely stunned. What? I can't handle it, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. The stress of their condition. It's too much for me. I'm not built for it like you are. It's better for them to be with you. I'll provide financial support, of course. In that moment, Lena saw the truth. He wasn't just leaving her. He was abandoning his own children. He was throwing them away like a problem he no longer wanted to solve. The man she had built a life with, the man she had dreamed with, the man who had held his newborn triplets with tears of joy in his eyes was willingly, coldly, walking away from them because they were too much. She didn't cry. She was too shocked, too hurt, too betrayed for tears. She just looked at the stranger in her living room and felt her world, the one she had fought so hard to build and protect, shatter into a million pieces at her feet. Without another word, Eris turned and walked out the door. He didn't look back at his sleeping children. He didn't look back at the wife whose heart he had just broken. He walked out into the night towards his new life, believing he had just set himself free. But he was wrong. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and the weight of what he had done would follow him forever. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain for the wife, Lena. It was a deep, heavy ache that lived in her bones. The silence in the house was the worst part. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of absence, broken only by the sounds of her children, who kept asking a simple, heartbreaking question. Where is Papa? She would gather them in her arms, her throat too tight to speak, and just hold them. She had to find an answer, but how do you explain to a child that their father chose to leave? She felt like she was living in two worlds at once. In one, she was a powerful business leader, managing a team and millions of dollars, making decisions that would shape the future of cities. In the other, she was a shattered woman, sitting on the floor of her children's room, crying silent tears after they had finally fallen asleep. She hired a lawyer. It was a difficult process. The man Eris was not fighting for the children, but he was fighting for the money. His lawyer, paid for by his powerful new position at work, argued that he deserved a significant share of the future earnings from the $750 million contract. They claimed that as her husband he had supported her, and that the idea was developed during their marriage. Lena sat in the lawyer's office listening to this. She felt a cold anger replace the sadness. She remembered all those nights she had worked on her designs alone after everyone was asleep, while he saw it as just a hobby. She remembered the weight of the medical bills, a weight she had now lifted all by herself. The unfairness of it was a fire inside her. Her lawyer was a sharp, no-nonsense woman. She looked at the documents and then at Lena. He abandoned his 3 sick children. He walked away from his parental duties. No judge in the world is going to look kindly on that. We will fight this, and they did. The legal battle was short but intense. When the day in court arrived, the judge, a serious-looking woman, listened to both sides. She heard about the contract, the money, the marriage, but she kept coming back to one simple, undeniable fact: the children. She looked at Eris, who sat stiffly in a new, expensive suit. "Is it true, sir," the judge asked, her voice calm but firm, "that you have voluntarily chosen not to seek custody of your 3 children, who have significant medical needs?" Eris shifted in his seat. He tried to explain about stress and his career demands. He used words like unable to provide adequate care and believed it was in their best interest. The judge listened, her expression not changing. She then turned to Lena, who sat quietly, her hands clenched in her lap. She saw a mother who had not only conceived a brilliant project, but was now solely responsible for the well-being of 3 vulnerable children. The ruling was swift. The judge granted Lena the divorce. She awarded her full custody of the triplets. As for the money, the judge ruled that the contract was the direct result of Lena's unique skill and genius. something she had cultivated largely on her own. Eris was given a one-time cash settlement. It was enough money to live comfortably on for a few years, but it was a tiny, tiny fraction of the contract's value. It was not the lifetime of wealth he had expected. He had lost. He had lost his family, and he had lost his claim to the golden ticket. For Lena, it was a victory, but it felt hollow. She walked out of the courtroom not feeling like a winner, but simply like someone who had survived a terrible storm. She had protected her children and her work, but her family was gone. For Eris, the outcome was a shock. He felt cheated. He walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, feeling a burning sense of injustice. But he had made his choice, and he was determined to see it through. He had his career. He had Victoria. Within a month of the divorce being finalized, he married Victoria. The wedding was everything his first marriage wasn't. Lavish, cold, and perfect. It was held in a modern art museum, all sharp angles and glass. The guests were important people from the business world. There was no laughter, no messy, joyful chaos. It was a transaction, beautifully packaged. He wore a tailored tuxedo and smiled for the cameras. He told himself this was success. This was the life he had wanted. He was now married to a powerful, wealthy woman, and he had a lead role on the most important project in the company. He had climbed the mountain. He moved into Victoria's sterile, minimalist penthouse. Everything was white, gray, and chrome. There were no toys on the floor. No crayon drawings on the refrigerator. The silence here was different from the silence he had left behind. That silence had been filled with memory and love. This silence was just empty. He started his new job, but it wasn't the triumph he imagined. His colleagues knew the story. They knew he had left his sick children and his wife right after her incredible success. They respected his title, but their eyes held a cold contempt. The whispers followed him in the hallway. "That's him," people would say. The one who married the boss after ditching his family. He was not a respected leader. He was office gossip. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind would often wander. He would think about the children. He wondered if their therapy was working. He wondered if they ever asked for him. A sharp pain would stab his heart, but he would quickly push it down. He had made his choice. This was his life now. A life of quiet order, expensive things, and a wife who was more of a business partner. He sat in his new corner office looking out at the city and tried to convince himself that he was happy. But the hollow feeling in his chest was growing, and he didn't know how to make it stop. 2 years passed. For the man, Eris, the time moved in a strange way. It felt both incredibly long and like it had flown by in an instant. He lived now in a world of sharp edges and clean surfaces. His life with Victoria was a perfectly scheduled series of events. They attended galas, hosted dinner parties for important clients, and discussed market trends over breakfast. Their home was like a magazine photo, beautiful, expensive, and completely without life. There were no sticky fingerprints on the glass tables, no joyful shouts echoing in the halls. The silence was deep and constant. He had the title he wanted. He had the office with the view. He had the expensive car. But the feeling he had chased, the feeling of being important, of being the star, never came. His colleagues followed his orders but offered no friendship. They called him sir to his face, but he knew what they called him behind his back. He was a living cautionary tale, the man who had traded his family for a corner office. His marriage to Victoria was a business partnership. They were roommates who shared a bank account and a bed. There was no warmth, no softness, no shared laughter over silly little things. They talked about work, about investments, but they never talked about their fears or their dreams. How could he tell her about the hollow ache in his chest that never went away? She would have seen it as a weakness, a flaw in their perfect corporate life. One evening, he was sitting in the living room scrolling through a news app on his tablet. He was avoiding going to bed, where he would just lie next to Victoria in the dark, pretending to sleep. An article popped up in the top stories section. It was a feature story about a new revolutionary children's medical center that was opening in the city. The headline called it a beacon of hope. He almost scrolled past it. But then he saw the photo. It was a picture of his ex-wife, Lena. She was standing in the bright, colorful lobby of the new center, surrounded by children. She was smiling, but it was a different smile from the one he remembered. It was a smile of deep, genuine joy. Her eyes shone with a purpose that went beyond business success. His heart started to pound. He clicked on the article and began to read. The article described how Lena had used a portion of the profits from her famous project to fund a massive research initiative. The goal was to find new treatments for rare muscular disorders in children. The article explained that this new medical center was the result of that funding. It was a place that offered the most advanced care in the world, completely free for families who couldn't afford it. Then, he read the sentence that made the breath catch in his throat. The reporter had asked Lena what inspired her to do this. Her answer was simple and direct. "My children," she said. "Watching them fight every day showed me what true strength is." This project was never just about buildings or money. It was always about building a better world for them and for children like them. They are my real success. The article included a small recent picture of the triplets. They were a little older, sitting in specially designed wheelchairs, and they were laughing. Really laughing. One of them was pointing at something off camera, a look of pure delight on his face. They looked healthy. They looked happy. They looked loved. Eris stared at the picture. He saw his son smile, the same smile he used to see every morning. A memory, sharp and painful, flashed in his mind. It was a simple memory. He was on the floor of their old, messy living room, pretending to be a monster while the triplets shrieked with laughter and crawled all over him. Lena was watching from the kitchen, laughing at the scene. The feeling in that moment, the pure, messy, perfect joy of it, flooded back to him. It was a feeling he had not felt for 2 long years. He had thought he was building a new life, a better life. But sitting in his cold, quiet penthouse looking at the picture of his laughing children, he realized the terrible truth. He hadn't built anything. He had just walked away from everything. The $750 million contract had never been the problem. It was a gift, a miracle that could have lifted their whole family up together. The problem was his own pride, his own insecurity. He had been so afraid of being overshadowed that he had blinded himself to what was truly important. He had mistaken the chaos of a loving family for a burden, when it was actually the most precious thing he would ever have. Victoria walked into the room, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "Are you coming to bed? We have the early meeting with the investors tomorrow." He didn't look up from the tablet. He couldn't. He just nodded, unable to speak. She paused, looking at him. "What's wrong with you?" He finally looked up, and she saw the tears streaming silently down his face. He had not cried since the day he walked out. He had been too numb, too focused on proving his choice was right. "Everything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Everything is wrong." He had achieved everything he thought he wanted. He had a powerful wife, a powerful job, and a powerful bank account. But he had lost his family. He had lost his children. He had lost the woman who had loved him through the hardest times. He had given up a treasure for a cheap imitation. The victory he had won was the hollowest kind of victory. He sat there in the beautiful, silent apartment, surrounded by every material thing he could ever want, and felt a poverty of the spirit so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. The $750 million had saved his children's future, but his choice to leave had bankrupted his own soul, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it was a debt he could never repay.